Well, hello, everybody. I am so glad to be here today with Amanda Knox. I am Missy Gluckman. I am the founder of Melibee Global and Melibee Global Speakers. And I'm delighted to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a great topic.
Yes, we're going to talk about study abroad, culture, and language today. First, let me introduce Amanda to you. For those of you who don't know her, she is, I have my little paper here, so let me make sure I get it all right. She is an author. She's a podcaster, an advocate for wrongly convicted people. She's a mom as of October. Is that correct?
Actually, as of July, I just didn't tell anyone about it until October.
Oh, awesome. As of July. And bravo to you for, I should say brava, right? To you for,
Brava! Hai fatto bene!
for figuring out how to do that. Well done. So you are a mom to a daughter, you are a partner friend, and you are a daughter yourself. She
Mhm.
studied abroad in Perugia, Italy. And while she was there, for anybody who wasn't born then or hadn't read the news ever, she was wrongfully convicted of the murder of her roommate, Meredith Kircher. And I'm just going to take a moment, put my hand on my heart as a mom and as a study abroad administrator for many years, and just remember that life that was lost during that time.
Yeah.
And after nearly a decade, I think that's about right. Amanda, you were eventually exonerated, correct?
Yes, yeah. So after 4 years in prison and 8 years on trial.
Well, that'll make me tear up too. I'll tell you, that's a lot to think about, uh, and a lot to go through. But the good news is today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to, unless Amanda feels there's anything she wants to share related to culture, study abroad, and
Sure.
language. And for any of you who haven't seen the New York Times article that I think came out last year in 2021, it's a really beautiful piece because it is about something that I think is really important, which is remembering that Amanda and all of us are multidimensional people, and we all have many different identities and stories to share. So I would love to talk about study abroad, culture, and language with you.
Love
Um,
it.
yeah, so let's do it. So welcome. So my first question for you is, what was your first awareness of culture, Amanda, whether it was something from your childhood? So tell me a little bit about that.
Honestly, I've always been aware that there are differing cultures because as far as I can remember, I grew up in a divorced family. So my mom and my dad had separate households. And even that, the culture was incredibly different between my dad's house and my mom's house. In part because my mom and dad came from culturally different backgrounds. My dad is all American, like hot dogs and hamburger helper kind of guy, plays, baseball, like all American guy. Whereas my mom was born in Germany and was an army brat. And so she had traveled around a lot. And the, we, instead of having, I don't even know what people eat at Christmas here in America, but we eat rouladen and we make, rotkohl and like, when the plums are in season, we make Zwetschgenknödel, and my oma is my oma. So I grew up in a multicultural environment and always had an appreciation for how the world as you are familiar with it is not necessarily the world as someone else is familiar with it.
And so Oma, for anybody who doesn't know, means grandmother, correct?
Grandmother, yes, in
Okay.
German.
In German. Okay. Oh, interesting, right? So you're tapping into culture, American culture, how that varies uh,
Hmm.
even within the same home. So important.
Absolutely, yeah.
So so I don't like to use the term foodie, but I really like food, and I think food is such a beautiful vehicle for culture. So tell me a little bit about some of these food traditions. You mentioned some things I hadn't heard of before, and I have a German last name, although I think that's probably a whole other conversation about why I don't know much about German food. But okay.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, actually, I mean, even I can speak a little bit to that point because as much as I very much had a link to my German roots, especially through food. I didn't have as much a link to my German roots through language because when my Oma migrated here with her American husband, back when, and I think my mom was around 6 years old, Um, when my mom went into school speaking German, the teacher told my Oma that she needed to stop speaking German at home so that
Mhm.
my mother would learn English. And so, of course, my mother lost German. And I did not grow up speaking German. I just grew up with an Oma who had a very, very German accent and eating very, very German food. So anything from, just traditional uh, breakfast or it just lunchy kind of things where it's very like heavily bread and deli meat based. We would always go to Hans Delicatessen and to get, sausages and cheeses and German bread, mustard. And then I would walk away with a Kinder Surprise, which is one of those little chocolate eggs that have
Oh, yeah.
toys in them. A lot of pretzels and things like that. But then, of course, for dinner, we would have things like goulash and lots of sauerkraut and lots of rotkohl, which is basically the red cabbage version of sauerkraut, and what I honestly prefer the red cabbage version. Lots and lots of bratwurst, lots of that kind of food.
Mhm.
um Potatoes, lots of potatoes. So I grew up with a heavily like starch and meaty, like fatty uh flavor palette. And then lots of like vinegar on everything,
Yeah.
um and God, this even reminds me of like going to elementary school, and while the rest of the kids are like eating their sort of white bread sandwiches, I'm walking in there with like lentil soup with like a ham hock in it. Like I had some like deep German stuff going on there, and I loved it. Like honestly, I loved it. I loved having something different, and I loved having something that, like, when I got to talk about, when I went to school and we would talk about Christmas or what we're going to do for Christmas, like my family lights real candles on the tree, like in a very
Ah,
German tradition.
yeah, yeah.
We make a very highly alcoholic fire wine called Feuerzangenbowle, which is super. I mean, it's basically just an excuse to make wine even more sugary and alcoholic than it already is.
I think you might need to
um,
say that 10 times fast anyway.
yeah, Feuerzangenbowle, and it's super fun because you take like this big pot of wine, and then you have this thing that lies across it that a big sugar cone sits on, and then you drench the sugar cone in 151 and light it on fire so that
Whoa.
the sugar like caramelizes and then drips into the wine, and then you serve it hot to everyone. It's like Glühwein, but like
Yeah.
with a little bit of extra something something. But anyway, and like I have cousins who live in Germany, and they would come and visit, and everyone would start all of a sudden speaking German, and my mom can understand German but not speak it.
Mhm.
um and so I was always aware of that, and there were conversations within my family. I'm the oldest of my generation. I'm the oldest of all my cousins and all of that, and there
Okay.
was always these conversations, especially with my Oma, because she really wanted me to study abroad in high school. She wanted me to go live with my cousins in Germany for at least a year of high school. And looking back, I wish I had done that. I don't actually know why. I think my mom maybe didn't want to not be around me for a year, so she didn't
Yeah.
encourage me the way that she encouraged me to study abroad when I was in college.
Okay, thank you for all of that. And you're reminding me, it's a very good point about why we lose language and culture as immigrants, right? So my grandfather's father was an immigrant. The story is that he spoke 11 languages, and when he came
Ugh.
to New York, he made sure that his children did not have any accents and were not discriminated against, and they were
Oh.
lost, which is tragic, of course. Uh, okay, so you are a polyglot. Can you tell us what languages you speak? And what languages did you study prior to going abroad?
hmm So I speak English and Italian fluently, and I am familiar and can get by in German, but I am certainly not fluent. Prior to studying abroad in Perugia in college, I actually studied Japanese in high school. And prior to that, I studied Latin in middle school. So the Latin was I didn't really have a choice. It was the only language in middle school, but it was a great foundation and honestly a kind of a cool language to learn. Um, and I remember visiting Europe for the first time when I was 14, um, and going to Italy for the first time in my life with my entire family and going to all of these places that I had read about in middle school in my Latin book and getting to talk about the history of these places that I had just absorbed. And, I hadn't studied in order to go to Italy, but we did. And then I was like, oh, hey, if we walk around the corner, I think there's that crazy mosaic, like, oh my gosh, there it is.
Yeah.
So I felt very smart at 14. And then I studied, like I said, Japanese in high school because I was really big into reading anime or manga and watching anime.
Okay.
And the first time I actually, quote, studied abroad was actually to Japan. I went for a few weeks, not very long,
Mhm.
to Japan with my class. And I stayed with a Japanese family while I was there in Kyoto. And that was the funnest experience of my entire life.
Awesome.
I loved it. I love Japanese culture. I love Japanese food. I love feeling like the sisterhood with the host family girl who I was in her bedroom with her. We played
Mhm.
video games together. We went out and did DDR at, like I was doing a lot of more video gamey things back in that day. But yeah,
Yeah.
I loved DDR. We were just having like in arcades. It was so much fun. And of course, we did the very like traditional, like you stay at a traditional hotel where you take off your shoes and there's a very
Mhm.
particular way of eating. And I just loved that. I
Mhm.
loved it. I loved how it was different and how I was sort of stumbling around like a new child. Like there were times like she took me to a bathhouse for the first time and I
Mhm.
got into trouble because I didn't know that you're supposed to, like, there was a particular order that you were supposed to go in the baths. And I was just sort of floating around like an American who doesn't know what they're doing. um,
Right.
and it was great. And I also love like, I don't know, a lot of people are really nervous about learning a second language because they don't
Mhm.
want to sound dumb. They
Right.
don't want to sound like children. And I kind of lean into that. Like I enjoy that intermediary stage between l- between just learning a language and fluency where there's familiarity and where your mind is transitioning between translating and just speaking.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of moments in those times where your mind is being really creative and you're making up ways to say things using the access you have to that language, but maybe not knowing the correct way of saying them. And
Mhm.
I've come up with really funny, like ultimately occasionally poetic ways of saying things that are totally wrong, but
Right.
ultimately work.
Right.
It's
Right.
great.
Like you get the message across,
Hmm.
but yeah, you
And
like
then
you
people
said,
are like, that's a weird way of saying it, but I totally know what you're saying. And you're like,
right.
yes.
And there is that's such a breakthrough moment where people understand you, where they
Hmm.
get that point. And for you, it's so empowering and so humbling too. I mean, I've
Hmm.
taken Spanish forever in school. I am, even at this age, nowhere near anything close to fluent. I mean, I'm probably still at a low intermediate level, but I can get around. And there
Hmm.
is that space. We lived in Ecuador for 2 months before the pandemic.
Hmm.
And and my husband had not traveled and lived someplace or stayed someplace that long before he had traveled abroad, but I was doing a lot of translating for him. It was a lot of tourism travel, kind of initial, like, okay, we're in Quito and here's what you need to know. And let's order
Right.
some food and get a taxi kind of stuff. But I was doing it so often that sweet spot that you're talking about, where you go from how do I say this? What's that word? To where you find yourself suddenly speaking it. It is such a magical place. And I often wonder, there are people who are born with the travel bug. I mean, I think anyone who's worked in this field of international education or has studied abroad, there's like this something about your being that drives you, this curiosity, this something. And
Hmm.
I wonder what it is about people like us that that going into the unknown, that discomfort is so rewarding.
Hmm. That's a good question. I mean, if anything, I just relish, I don't know, like it seems so familiar to me because like I said, like going between even my own parents' houses
Mhm.
was a sort of night and day kind of thing. It was just there were very different rules and
Right.
there were different styles and I had different clothing and so I just going somewhere else and feeling how another person lives and sort of imagining like sort of having this imagination like, oh, if I had grown up here, I would be this kind of person. Or if I lived here now, like, where would
Yeah.
I be? Like there is that sense of exploring, having access to versions of yourself that don't quite exist.
Yeah.
That I think is interesting. It's a way to explore the self, really, is like probing these external sources and see how they reflect on you, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful point because when we do find ourselves in a place where there are no preconceived notions, except our passports, of course, theoretically, about
Hmm.
who we are,
Yeah.
we get those different perspectives. And I think for a lot of people, when I think back of years of people I advised, so many went abroad for academic reasons or, to meet academic requirements or because their friend had studied someplace or they maybe might have been um, that might have been a country of origin from someone in their family, adopted students who were going back to places that their birth families came from. So many different reasons, but there's definitely, and this is something I certainly can say about myself during big life transitions for me also, that there is something about the escapism of it too. Like I need
Mm,
to,
yeah.
I go here and I don't need to be anyone showing up for anything except me in that moment. And
Hmm.
then I think we find it, I think there are two kinds of people. If I had to like, really break it down, right? Where there are people like us who are like, I have no idea what's down that street. I'm running that
Yeah.
direction. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And then there are other people who are really like, I need to know what's the plan. And that's really
Mm,
uncomfortable to the point that they can't. But
yeah.
I also like you lean into that. And I think there is an element of escapism in
I
that
think
too.
you're very, very right because, like, even when I was exploring the idea of going to college, I thought about going to college somewhere else entirely. And a part of that is like, I can just, it's a little bit like I can start over in a new way and I can
Yes.
just, and I think the trick is you can always do that. It's just a lot easier when like all of a sudden there's a whole new social network around you,
Oh,
for sure.
absolutely. Well, it's so true. And I think that's something that comes with wisdom, and that takes time for people to realize so much about their identity is not necessarily rooted in where they are or who they're with.
Mhm.
Okay, well, this could be a very long conversation because I have like 7 or 8 questions for you, and I
Oh,
think
was that just the first one?
that we made
Oops.
it to number 2 before I've like totally gone down that road of I don't know where this is gonna go. Let's do it. Right? This could be
Sure.
interesting. Okay. So you chose to study in Italy, right?
Mhm.
So can you tell us why you chose Italy and why Perugia particularly? I don't know if it was because, and for people
Mhm.
who don't know, a lot of schools and universities have like approved school lists that you can, get relatively easy access to without
Right.
jumping through as many academic hoops. So tell me a little bit about why you chose Italy and why Perugia.
Yes. So when I got to college, I had to I by this time I was going into my third year of college, so I'm thinking about what am I majoring in, what direction am I really going in my life? And because I enjoy language so much and because I have the travel bug and that's a big part of who I am, um, I explained to my parents that I wanted to be a professional translator. And
Mm.
I felt like I needed to have multiple languages under my belt. So I was studying a Romance language, I was studying a Germanic language, and I was focusing my attention on majoring in those languages. And when I decided that I wanted to study abroad, I applied for both Italy and Germany. because I just wanted to see where it would take me. And you're right, like my college, the University of Washington, had connections with specific schools in specific cities in these various countries.
Mhm.
Perugia is actually a sister city with
Ah,
Seattle.
okay.
So that's why there's that connection. There's also the fact that Perugia, for how small of a town it actually is quite the university town. It actually has two universities. I didn't even know that when I was applying, that it had a regular Italian university, and then it had a language focused university called the Università per Stranieri, so the University for Foreigners,
Yeah.
which was entirely, its entire focus was learn Italian language, learn Italian culture. And
Okay.
that was perfect for me. And I ended up applying for, like I said, both in Germany and in Italy. I applied to a program in Freiburg in
Yep.
Germany, and I just happened to have been accepted to Perugia first. And so I was like, all right, Italy, here we go. Here we go. And also, like, a part of me also was hoping that it would be Italy
Mhm.
because I actually was much better at speaking German at the time. I had
Okay.
more of a history with German. My family, like, I could go to my Oma and practice with her. I didn't really have anyone in my life at the time who spoke Italian with me. And so I was very, very at the beginning stages of learning Italian. And I thought, well, here you go, crash course, like get this on under your belt. And my plan was to study in Perugia longer than normally people do. Usually the people who were in my study group would stay for like 3 months, but I was planning on staying 9 months and then going to a program in Rome to study poetry, because I thought maybe in my translating work, I can be a professional poetry translator. I really liked poetry.
Oh, that's
So
beautiful.
that was like my ideal life plan.
And it didn't quite go as you planned,
Didn't
but it
quite go
did.
as I planned it, like all study abroad trips.
It's true. It's true. What's interesting about that is you were really the exception, because most students who do study abroad, the trend shifted many years ago. There used to be the junior year abroad where people would go for a full academic year, which is more like the 9-month thing you were trying to
Yeah.
do. And most people do go abroad for shorter periods. Although I'm very curious with the pandemic, if all these people have been chomping at the bit, and everybody who's been, just waiting for this wave to end will consider going for longer. I certainly hope so, because as you know, the longer you
I think
spend.
it's way better
Oh,
longer.
yeah.
Like 3 months is like touch and go. You don't
Mhm.
really get to, you just have a very different mindset when you're like, it seems more like a vacation instead of a
Yeah.
life investment.
And it
And
also feels like this countdown clock starts, and it's like, how much can I squeeze in? I'm in Italy, so now I'm going to go try and see everything big in the whole country, and I've got 90 days to do it. It feels
yeah.
really unrealistic. There's definitely something about the length of time and the immersive quality of that, as you've touched on. So, okay, well, that explains why you ended up in Italy. And then I had a question. Gosh, I like, why don't I just move my notes closer? That would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? Okay. So you answered my next question, the goals you had for your future when you chose study abroad. So it was translation, which is
Yeah, I wanted to be a translator. I thought you could apply having being a polyglot to a lot of different circumstances. If I needed to, I could maybe be a flight attendant or something like that. But my ideal vision was I translate poetry.
And has that ever been something on this wild ride that you've been on that you've thought about circling back to at some point? Have you ever thought about uh, with with life as it's happened, and being a mom and going down a different path in life than you anticipated? Is that something you've thought about doing now that you have the language skills, certainly the oral skills?
I mean, for today, I do that for fun. Like that's the thing that
Okay.
I enjoy doing. It's not what I get paid to do. And I think that who knows? Like maybe
Right.
if I totally want to shift gears and pivot, like you're
Hmm.
talking about, I can
Yeah.
pivot in that direction. But I just have a lot of the way that I've pivoted my life so far has been due in large part to this pressing feeling of like, oh my gosh, I am aware of something that's seriously wrong with the world and I need to like do something
Sure.
about it. So I do
Sure.
feel more of a sense of urgency with the direction that I've taken my life today,
Yeah.
but I still enjoy reading and translating poetry.
Well, you certainly have a calling right now, so that's a good thing. Okay, so how are you using hard and soft skills that you've learned along the way through your experiences with travel, even traveling between homes, as you've talked about, and other parts of the U.S. and abroad? How are you using those skills in your work and in your life? Because I think culture and language teach us so much. Um, if I tell people, even if you never plan to leave your town, you still need those skills to interact successfully and communicate and be a good global citizen, right? So
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about how you think you've used those skills in your everyday life.
I think that first of all, one of the big things that I try to do is not take communication and mutual understanding for granted.
Right.
That's been hammered home to me in a very, very big way.
Mhm.
And I do feel that having had the experience of being understood, but also greatly misunderstood in part because of language and cultural differences, it's made me appreciate the ways that communication can wildly succeed or wildly fail, even when both parties are attempting their very best, you know?
Mhm.
And so in my own journalism today, I have a podcast called Labyrinths. Um, I interview people often about very, very difficult moments of their lives when they felt lost or when they felt misunderstood. And part of that is a cultural issue, and part of it is because you don't have the right words to explain how you feel. And when and how human understanding and the tools that we've developed in order to understand each other fail.
Mhm.
And how can we instead succeed and uplift each other after these moments of those failing? Yeah. I
Okay.
would say that's probably the like most direct way that I'm always thinking about it. And it's always a good reminder that like
Mhm.
even just a word means the connotation of a word, even if we're speaking in English to the same, like it can mean something really, really different depending upon the context in which we've had that word spoken to us and the ideologies that are surrounding that word, and
Yeah.
um and what we feel is this word means when it's in, like when it's being used. And it has it ever been like, some people really embrace the word slut and they live by it and they're taking it back, and then some people are deeply, deeply traumatized and they can never imagine a good way for someone to
Right.
use the word slut. And like, as someone who's
Right.
had that hurled at me, like I can appreciate that there's a lot of nuance.
Oh, there's so much. When I think about what you're talking about, I think about the root of words, right?
Mm.
They can be rooted in trauma, they can be rooted in joy, they can be rooted in something much more neutral, right?
Yeah.
They can be rooted in education, in class. I mean, there's so much around that. It's a really beautiful example that you gave, how this word that was slung at you for other people can feel empowering. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay, with that said, I think about the nonverbals and I think about how much they are a part of culture. And there's research that says it could be as much as 60 or 70% of how we communicate. Do you have any good
Mm-hmm.
examples from your travels or things, life lessons, and how that's impacted you?
Oh man. I mean, the Italians are quite verbal and quite nonverbal.
Yes, they are.
And yes, they are. And I think that like it's one of the big reasons why I think I was singled out at the very beginning after Meredith was found murdered, was because I was not signaling both verbally and non-verbally the same way, like my distress or my despair or my anguish, the same way as my very Italian roommates were.
Mhm.
And I think that because there was a cultural expectation for a certain kind of external flamboyance and display of distress or despair or anguish that I was not meeting,
Right.
people started looking at me the wrong way.
Mhm.
And I think that like even just that small thing
Mhm.
can make a huge difference. And it doesn't matter what you say, and it doesn't matter what you do at that point. And oftentimes it doesn't even matter what the evidence is.
Right.
It's what is that first impression that you have of a person? What is that expectation you have of how that person should be non-verbally expressing? And if they don't meet whatever standards you have in your mind that are influenced in large part by culture and by
Yeah.
um, you know, projection, how can that lead to vast harm and due to misunderstanding?
Mhm. Yeah, it's bringing up two things for me. One is I have taught English as a second language before, and I think about, and I don't know if you experienced this in Japan, um, my Japanese students would often close their eyes
Hmm.
when I would lecture on something. And at first I thought, oh my gosh, I'm literally
They're
putting
falling
students to
asleep or
sleep.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's really just a way to help them focus. It was very cultural. Um,
Mm.
the
I
second
have
thing,
not noticed that, but that's super interesting, right? And like for us, it'd be like, oh my God, I can't close my eyes in class. Like that would be horrible. But then they're like, no, I'm literally using all of my ears to listen to you.
right, right.
It's
Like I'm
amazing.
respecting you to a large degree, but it's easily could be misinterpreted. I mean, I had
Yeah.
students from all over the world in one class. So,
Mhm.
all of them were equally horrified at the idea that you could bring food into an American classroom and snack. That was that was just like
They're like, what am I watching a movie? Like, what is going on? Yeah. Or like my husband,
comprehensive.
my husband actually went to Korea and
Okay.
was working with a organization to help teach Korean students English so they could then study abroad in the US. And he remembers like all of these very, very interesting cultural differences of like the students wanting to take him out to dinner and give him a really extravagant dinner, and he was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to do that. Like I'm your teacher, I probably shouldn't be going out with you. And then, and then like that kind of stuff. Or like his students never ever spoke up in class. They would only ever bring their questions to him in after hours, like in office hours. And
Right.
he was like, but you could have just asked me in class. And they were like, no,
Mhm.
you never ask a question in class. Like, are
Right.
you
You're the
kidding me?
authority, the expert. We would never question your.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there are so many challenges there. And there's a lot of room for, as you said, misunderstanding, misinterpretation that can be very dangerous. But it also, what you were talking about reminded me of our children, right? Babies are nonverbal except for really in the beginning, largely nonverbal except for crying, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so much of our communication with our children
Mm-hmm.
is just observation and
Yep.
connection, this very human connection. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of this film. I think it was brought to my attention, I think before even our son was born, but it's a film called, I think it's called Babies, and I think it might be a National Geographic film. And
Okay.
it's literally like 5 or 6 babies being brought up around the world and just seeing what their daily lives are like.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
I'll
Yeah,
see
no,
if I
and
can
I
send you the link for the
100% agree with that. Like, and if your baby is vocalizing, it's because you haven't been paying attention to all of the various
right.
nonverbal cues that it's been giving you this whole time. And then
Right.
it's finally like, ah.
Right. Like,
And same way with like a cat though. Like I feel like I was really, really well prepared for a baby and being tuned into those nonverbal cues because
yeah,
cats are constantly giving you nonverbal cues.
they
And
are.
if a cat is like yelling at you,
You've
you
missed
have been ignoring
it.
them.
My son and I watched our neighbor's cat while they were traveling
Mhm.
for 3 weeks. They were from Europe. And it was so much fun to observe him with the cat. And I had tons of cats growing up. I volunteered at the Humane Society. I was like all
Mhm.
about the cats.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating to observe how he missed a lot of the cues, like how the cat's tail at the end, they'll let you know when they're like not happy about something and they're going to
Yep.
say it's time to get away. All these little things, little tricks to get the cat to come downstairs when it was time to leave. shaking the food
Yep.
out would come right down. It was so interesting to watch his awareness or lack of awareness in the beginning, and then to have him pick up on that. I wonder if he's translating any of that to humans yet. I have no idea. Hopefully. Okay, so if there were no pandemic and life were a little bit easier in terms of traveling, where would you want to go next? And if you could be I think any travel, literally from like the time you hit the airport, is a learning experience. Standing in line with people from different cultures, passports, rules, approaches to authority, all of it, right? So where would you want to go and learn? Where would you go?
So I already have a place that me and my husband want to go because we got married right before the pandemic hit. And so we never actually got to go on our honeymoon.
Aw,
And we decided that we really, really wanted to go, for me, back to Japan.
okay.
And we wanted to spend, at least 3 or 4 weeks there.
Mhm,
Um, and so of course that could not happen with the world shutting down with the pandemic, and we had to like get our flights, figured out, and all of that.
mhm.
But
Yeah,
he has never been to Japan. I have not been since, for goodness, Jesus, how old am I? I'm like 20 years.
right, right,
and and it's I just remember it being one of the happiest times of my life, and wanting to experience that as an adult, experience that with my partner, experience that now with my daughter.
right.
And Japanese food is just our favorite food.
Uh-huh.
So we are just like, if we were going to treat ourselves to a place, we're like, we would treat ourselves to the culture and the food and the natural beauty of Japan. So we're looking forward to that being sometime in the non-pandemic future, if that even exists.
Yes, yes, and we'll get there, although those borders are closed right now. Well, it's on my bucket list too, so I hear you. I often find myself, even pre-pandemic, diving into these TV shows and finding myself traveling alongside some very fortunate person who gets paid to
Yeah.
explore or eat somewhere or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
What a life.
that idea. I know, right? Right. Okay. So you are a mom now. And so to the extent that you're comfortable, how are you sharing? How are you translating or sharing culture with your daughter? What do you find yourself doing? Is it very intentional? Is one of your goals, like, for example, our son is 7, our child is 7, and we've very intentionally, he's older obviously than your infant, but we've put him in a bilingual school environment. We have him in a place, we very specifically picked a school that had a K1 Spanish program starting early on. So tell me a little bit about how you're sharing culture with your child, or intend to.
Yes. Well, I'm already very, very intentionally speaking to my daughter in multiple languages.
Good.
So I'm speaking to her in German, I'm speaking to her in Italian, I'm speaking to her in English, and I'm also signing to her. I'm
Oh,
teaching
awesome.
myself sign language while I'm also talking to her in sign language. And I, my husband and I have already thought about living a year or two abroad when she is old enough to be in like kindergarten kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so we want her to have the experience of not only being multilingual at home, but also having literally lived abroad before she is, as she is developing as a human being. Um, I think that is awesome. And I just love I love the idea of maybe like going back to my husband also has German roots, although they're a little bit further back in his line, and
Okay.
spending time with my cousins who live in Germany. Um, and, and a part of me is just like, and I need to work on my German, so I might as well just like full immersion time again,
Oh yeah, it's the
Um,
best way to do it. So,
yeah.
and especially when the kids are young, they pick it up. I see with my son, he has just the most beautiful accent that,
Hmm.
a lot of adults can't figure out, but he picks and absorbs things up so quickly. And like
Mm.
you, the plan was to have gone abroad with him already and just put him in an immersive environment where he would play and
Mhm.
take it all
Well,
in.
and then the pandemic hit. Ugh,
Yeah, I know,
gosh.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get there
Well,
eventually. I'm going to
yeah.
throw in one last question for you. If you are so inclined with the pandemic, I find myself, I mean, I've always focused on reading. I love to read, but I've always focused on non-US authors. It's sort of
Mhm.
like armchair traveling when I couldn't travel, and especially
Sure.
during the pandemic, I've been doing that. Are there any, I don't even know if you have time to read with all the other things you have going on in the world with your podcasts and being a mom and all those good things, but are there any books that come to mind when you think about crossing cultures or language?
Mm.
One that if you haven't read it, I always wanted to learn Hindi when I was
Oh, cool.
younger.
Yeah.
I have
There-
no idea where this India thing comes from, where I'm just like so madly in love with India. India and Italy are the two countries that I will go back to time and time again. Usually I like to try a new country when I
Mhm.
could travel more.
Sure, sure.
But there's a wonderful book called Dreaming in Hindi about an American woman who goes and puts herself in a language school as an adult to learn Hindi and her immersion
Cool.
experience. I'm just curious if do you have any books that you really love around culture or things on your list of books to read, when
Mhm.
one day.
Um, yeah, so just speaking of Italian authors who I love, love, love,
Mhm.
um, there is a couple that come to mind, one of whom is really easy to read. Um, um, so Leonardo Sciascia he writes, basically he just writes detective novels, mystery novels, and they're all really short, really fun, very accessible reads. So if you're
Okay.
learning the language, it's a really good, very like dialogue heavy, um, to the point kind of novella kind of thing that I highly recommend to anyone who's learning language.
Okay.
For more of a challenge that is just like artful, beautiful, like I, we don't even I struggle to find an author who does this in English, but
Mhm.
Umberto Eco in
Okay.
Italian is this incredible author who is so whimsical and fantastical, not just in his stories, but in his use of language. And one of the things I really appreciated about reading his books while I was in Italy and while I was learning Italian still is he has this habit of just listing things in his book. Like he'll just describe like what's in a desk drawer, and he'll just like keep going and keep telling you what's in this desk drawer. And you're just learning vocabulary,
Right.
just like one after another, just like, okay, here's this, here's this, here's this. Like I'm just,
Right.
it's a good, very like thick, dense, you have to have the patience for it, but it always, always is worth it. Really, really fun, whimsical, artful stories. And then of course, Italo Calvino is his fantastic short stories, Invisible Cities, um, beautiful, beautiful, again, whimsical, uh, artful use of language, but more accessible than Umberto Eco.
Okay.
So
Thank you for those recommendations.
yeah,
Definitely
for
get some
sure.
links. I'll see if I can find them and get some links for folks out there. Amanda, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to share about culture, language, and travel and study abroad?
Um,
And if
I mean, just stay safe. I mean, you can do everything right and still something bad can happen, but like as long as you are just staying connected with people and asking for help, even when you're not sure, like it's always okay to ask for help. And that's something that I always recommend is none of us are islands. Even when especially when we go abroad, we can feel a little bit adrift, and it's really good to connect and to stay in contact. So as much as you can do that, I recommend it.
it's excellent advice. It's as excited as students are often are to go. There are moments, I think, for any human to feel that isolation of and the emotional exhaustion of really
Mm-hmm.
adapting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully for most, it's just a really positive, beautiful experience.
Yeah.
So Amanda, thank you so much for being here. We're really
Yeah.
grateful and for sharing your stories. And
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
oh, I did too. And congratulations again on your newest identity as a mom.
Thank you so much. I love it.
It's yeah, we could talk for days about that. It's truly the best thing in the whole world for sure, and the greatest teacher. So
Totally.
yeah. Okay. Thank you, Amanda,
Thank you so much. Take care.
and you too.